Good evening, Canada, United States, and everybody around the world watching this who cares about commerce and finance and taxes. This is the Tax and Money Show, episode number 49. We have a special guest joining us shortly. That would be Rob Anders, the former member of Parliament for 18 years. Yes, this gentleman here is a banking expert, and this is the gentleman that I was working with. I think you all remember last year, Rob Anders and I. We are the ones that got you back your money for an extra 2 years. That's right. The banking, the Canada Federal Bank Charter Act, the Bank Act of Canada, it was going to expire this year on June 30th. And because Rob Anders and I did a series of 5 shows together, and you know me, I got a big mouth. I was telling all of you, do a bank run. Get your money out of Canada. Move it to Panama. Move it to the States. Get it gone. Get it into crypto. Do whatever you got to do. Well, you all know that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, those not so lovely individuals, along with CSIS, the Canadian Spy and Idiot Sentry Agency, well, I don't even know what it stands for. Nobody even knows who they are. They don't even carry guns. They even tell you on their spy website that they're not law enforcement. What exactly do these people do? They write reports, I think, to the government that get ignored, I'm sure, and they also watch this show and make sure that the federal government sees what we're doing. So when Rob Anders and I are talking about doing a bank run, well, obviously that gets back to Trudeau, and Trudeau went ahead and extended the Bank Act 2 more years. So you've got 2 more years to move your money safely. And Rob and I are going to talk about that tonight. Now, everybody knows that I now live in Panama. I live in the capital city of Panama City. I absolutely adore it here. We had 84 degrees today, sunshine, nice breeze. And I ate too much, as I always do when I go to the fish market. I had clams, I had shrimp, I had chicken wings. I had it all. And I had it all for less than $15. So I am ecstatic about my life here in Panama. I adore it here. Many of you are asking me, hey, what's going on with the riots in Panama now that Trump is taking over the canal? Well, where do we begin telling you what's wrong with that? What riots? What riots are we talking about here? I walk 10 kilometers a day in this town. I walk, it doesn't matter where in the city I go, I will go there. And we're talking the slums, the rich ends, the medium ends, the beach fronts. I go absolutely everywhere in this town. Nobody's rioting here. Panamanians only riot when their government is going to steal something from them. Or when Canada comes in, because that happened last year, the Canadian mining company that wanted to absolutely obliterate the economy here and obliterate the environment here, the Panamanian people shut the whole country down and kick the Canadian mining company out. That's when they will start their protesting. No, what Panamanians do Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights, they party. This is a city where car washes that operate as car washes during the day become nightclubs at night. And people show up with food and liquor and DJs, no idea where they come from, but they show up. People dance and party here all the time. And then we've got a week-long carnival taking place at the end of February, working its way into the beginning of March. This country parties, man. That's what they do. So no, there are no riots here at all over Trump's alleged threat to take over the canal. And that's not what he's doing, by the way, everybody. And the Chinese are not as influential here as you might think that they are. The Panama Canal here in Panama City has 4 cranes on the west side of the canal, and between 8 and 12 that operate at all times on the east side of the canal. And the 4 on the west side of the canal were built by a private for-profit Chinese company, but they didn't own the land. They just owned the cranes. They had a deal to be able to lift stuff off of their ships first. That's all that it was. But thinking about it, there's no choo-choo tracks on that side of the canal, so there's no real way for them to move merchandise. I think it's actually a losing endeavor, if you want the truth, because there's a train track and a storage yard on the east side of the canal. And that train moves goods to the north end of the country or to the middle of the country. So this Chinese company is not very smart. I don't see where it was a winning move for them at all. What Trump was actually talking about is not taking over the canal. What he was talking about is the Chinese government's made a very big move worldwide to loan money at astronomical interest rates to countries around the world for infrastructure projects, knowing that these countries cannot pay those debts, and the Chinese would then take over the infrastructure that their fake money paid for. For example, almost every highway in Pakistan is owned by China now. Yeah, they own all the shipping routes, the vehicle shipping routes now in Pakistan, because Pakistan fell for this. In Myanmar, all of you know that I was in that Myanmarian war zone back in 2018, January 2018. The Chinese were building a shipping port in the city of Sitwe, a city that has only one traffic light within it, I might add. That city was then going to be taken over. The Chinese knew what they were doing. They were going to take the whole city over. The problem is, at the time, interim president Aung San Suu Kyi simply didn't have the balls to say no to the Chinese, because she's a Buddhist pacifist. Sweet lady. I met her. I interviewed her, but she wasn't the one to say no to the Chinese. So the military junta, spelled junta, they got in there and they told the Chinese, no. That's what they said. No. But the problem is, everybody in Myanmar misinterpreted what the junta was actually doing. So it triggered a civil war between the Rakhine state, which is like their Quebec, and the eastern state of Myanmar. And then when the country was infighting, that's when the Islamic gangs of Bangladesh, they decided to make their move into the Rakhine state on the west side of the country and start slaughtering people again, because they were doing it when I was there, and they started doing it again a year and a half later, all because the military said no to China. Well, the Chinese government made the same type of deal here in Panama to build infrastructure. The 4 cranes we talked about, that's a private company. But the highway systems and the choo-choos and whatnot, yes, China was funding that. And now they are not, because Trump obviously made the appropriate threat in the appropriate way. But I don't think it's a threat. I think Trump made a deal. He's a businessman. I think that there's going to be a lot more money now coming into Panama because of this deal, where I'm sure the Americans are going to have to pick up the slack on what the Chinese will no longer be paying for. There's no war coming to Panama. Trump is not going to put battleships on the coast of Panama and launch rockets into this country. I live here. Do you think for a second a guy with my intelligence and my knowledge of politics in North America would still be right here on the shore, 800 meters away from the canal? If I thought for a second that Trump was going to put weapons on his ships and launch missiles into where I live, are you kidding? No, I'd be gone. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm staying here in Panama City, and I'm watching Americans flood into this town with lovely money. They're bringing lots of money with them. There is a complete and total influx of cash since Trump took office. So God bless them for it. Panama is doing just fine, and America is not going to own it. America is just going to do business. That's it. All right. So I'm quite thrilled to see what Trump is doing. But now it's time to bring in Rob Anders, our special guest, because we got to talk about digital currency, and we do have to talk about Chinese influence around the world, along with Canada's, lack of influence around the world now. We're going to talk about everything that Canadians and Americans and even Panamanians need to consider about their money. Rob, welcome back to the show. It is always an extreme pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us once again.
Good to see you, my friend.
Well, tell everybody who you are and why they need to love you as much as I do. Go ahead.
Was a member of Parliament for 18 and a half years in Ottawa, representing Calgary West. And I think I've taken it upon myself to learn what I can about central bank digital currency. And it's not good. And the more I learn, the less I like. So I've been doing my best to try to warn people about it. And I was just reading a report today that the Justice Center is going to be putting out about it, warning people about the threats that central bank digital currency has to their privacy, their security, their freedom. So yeah, we're beating the drum on it, and I'm always happy with Ben Clausen or John Carpe or anybody else who wants to join the discussion and talk more about this.
All right, so we're going to cover crypto throughout the course of the show. You worked with the Minister of Defense in Canada for a while, is that right?
Several of them, sure. Whether it was Peter MacKay or Jason Kenney or Liberals, etc. Yeah, John McCallum, etc. Yeah, etc.
All right, now just talk to me a second here. The Minister of Defense in Canada, what do they actually do?
Well, a lot of them are just figureheads, to be honest. When Art Eggleton, for example, was Minister of National Defense, I actually felt really sorry for the brass that would come to visit him. My office was on the same floor, third floor, West Block. And, Art's office had a lot of those kids with, kind of green and blue and, whatever hair going on and lots of piercings and stuff. And I would see all these, polished brass military guys, shine shoes, the whole 9 yards, coming in, and they had to do presentations to these kids. They were obviously woke and progressive and liberals and all that type of stuff. And I thought, those poor bastards, they've probably served 20, 30 years, whatever, in the military, and they have to come in and report to these as their civilian oversight. I thought, dear God. So some of them are kind of figureheads. John McCallum was actually a minister at one point. If you can believe it, he was actually giving away plans for our Canadian warships. We have the most advanced ship we have in the Canadian fleets are our frigates, and they are so EH-101 helicopters can fly on those things and drop sonar buoys in the water so that Canada can help with regard to anti-submarine warfare. Yeah, it's the fastest ship in the fleet. It's the most sophisticated in terms of its listening devices, etc. And they have this thing, a claw, that captures the EH-101 and then hauls it into protection so that it's protected from the inclement weather, especially in the North Atlantic with the sea salt and everything else. McCallum was touring a Chinese admiral around, and the admiral said, "Oh, that looks interesting. We'd like that." It was a uniquely Canadian design. He just gave it to him, and then people have been talking about how the Chinese military was practicing in the Canadian Arctic or had arrangements to do so. Well, that goes back to John McCallum. You think about it. China's got cold areas. They got places up in the north, Manchuria, etc. Up, against Nepal, Tibet, etc. They don't need to practice winter warfare in Canadian Arctic, and obviously when they wanted to buy that mining company that was up with its own mainland access, type of thing where they could have a base up there. Like, it's just insanity. Some of the things some of these ministers have done to compromise our national security. I could go on.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, I'm sure that you could, but it just seems like our defense ministers have been complete idiots, fools, and don't know what they're doing. They know nothing about military tactics, probably never served in the military. And then to make a deal with the Chinese saying, "Hi, guys, come on over to our harsh climate and our harshly trained soldiers who are there specifically to fight in this weather. We'll teach you how to beat them in the very same weather." Wow. Why would they? Why?
The amount of subversion that has gone on in Canada, whether it's with regard to the military, Canadian Border Services Agency, the CRA, etc., with regard to China, politics, you could look at the BC legislature, you could look at the federal politics. It's disgusting, the amount of stuff that's gone on with that.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, is there maybe any precedent that could be set by making sure that we put somebody with real military experience into that role?
Well, that's part of the problem in Canada, is that so few of our elected representatives actually have any military background. Like in the United States, many more members of Congress and the Senate actually have military backgrounds in service, but in Canada, it's sadly lacking. And, I don't even necessarily have to have somebody with a military background, but they have to kind of get it. They have to understand national security. They have to care. Like the guy in McKay's office who was the best, his wife is now retiring as an MPP in Ontario, Lisa MacLeod, was Joe Varner. Joe Varner, when he worked for Senator Forrestal, did amazing counterterrorism work, produced these beautiful summations of kind of counterterrorism and terrorism activity around the world. I used to get those and read through those. And he was the guy that was coordinating those Halifax summits that Peter MacKay would put on in terms of North American security. So hats off to Joe Varner for his service to the country.
All right. So I think the correct answer to my question is the Minister of Defense does nothing except commit high treason. I think that's what I heard.
Yeah, well, there's recent ones where they were put in, I think, largely for the issue of gender and the idea that, there were women who, had complaints about the sexual harassment, etc. And it's a legitimate concern. Don't get me wrong; it's an issue. But surely to God, we put in ministers for more than just that. Like the Canadian military or the American military, any military for that matter, should have to deal with more than DEI and gender issues and transitioning and whatever. I mean, if that's the biggest issue, we're in deep trouble.
Yeah, and none of that makes money, by the way. So that's the biggest. It costs a lot of money. It doesn't make money. All right. So you're somebody who is very seasoned in politics in North America. So I just want to get your take now on the Trump election with him in office. You're also kind of an economist. You're definitely a banking expert. Is this good for North America and I guess the Western Hemisphere in general? Go ahead.
Well, okay, so Trump is in a war in a sense with China and BRICS. You've got these countries, whether it's Brazil, Russia, they say India, but I think India is actually hedging out of it. China, South Africa, etc. They're trying to challenge the U.S. dollar. And I'm not saying the U.S. dollar is perfect. They used to have 20,000 tons of gold. Now they're down to 8,000. But it's still the cleanest shirt in the laundry pile. And BRICS is a terrible scenario to go with. I mean, could you possibly trust the Chinese by telling you what they have in terms of gold reserves? And the Russians, of course, are spending most of it in Ukraine, so you can't trust them. And if I'm China, I'm sucking every bit of gold out of Russia for drones and missiles and whatever else I can get out of them. So I'm grateful that the Trump is battling that. My only worry that I have, my concern there, is I would not like to see the United States adopt the Fed now or a central currency, or even to limit the amount of cryptos that are out there so that effectively it becomes a central bank digital currency. So I do worry about that a little bit still. He's certainly better than Kamala Harris and Joe Biden or whatever with regard to that. But that is a worry. Like Europe, for example, I just saw today, I'll be putting out some stuff about this shortly, but the European Union is looking to introduce its own central bank digital currency in October of this year. And that's a terrible, terrible idea. So I'm grateful that there are European politicians, conservatives, nationalists. I imagine, the Geert Wilders and the Melonis in Italy and whatever that'll hopefully be fighting that, because it's a terrible situation for Europe to go into. The EU, the euro is already problematic enough. You've got 20 plus countries with 20 plus variables. That's 400 to 500 variables to try to figure out the value of that currency on any given day. Let's face it, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, they call the pigs in terms of their debt situations. Meloni, at least to her credit, is actually buying up gold to provide a bullion reserve for the Italian situation there. But their banks. But it's bad. And Brexit, Britain's out. Germany is the one holding the bag with the election of the Alternative for Deutschland. They want out. They don't want to be holding the bag and paying the bills for Europe. So the euro is going to be in trouble. And I think what the European central bankers are thinking is that they're going to switch over to some sort of European central bank digital currency. But it's not the right answer. The right answer is to actually look at a fractional reserve and go back to something based on precious metals.
Yeah, well, I've often said the same thing, but here's the problem. Going to, I guess, a gold-backed currency is, like you just said, we have no clue how much gold any country really has. I mean, just because Wikipedia says that the Americans have 8,000 to 9,000 tons of gold, does it mean it was reported properly? Was the page vandalized? We don't know. So
yeah. Let's just talk Canada, for example. I mean, in the 1960s, we used to have 2,500 tons of gold. If we had just kept it, hadn't added a single ounce, we would now have the third largest gold reserves in the world after the United States and Germany. China used to claim 3,000 tons, but they've sold off a bunch. They have economic troubles, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Oh yes.
So, and yeah, in Canada, we're still supposed to have a bunch of gold from the Netherlands and Belgium and some of these other countries. Ironically, despite the fact that we sold off all of our gold bullion. So yeah, there's a lot of countries that have unaudited gold reserves. That's an issue for sure.
Oh boy. Well, see, it's trust. And I think at this particular point, we've been lied to over this COVID thing for 4 years. It shut down economies all over the world. I'm actually seeing it here too, Rob, is that the office towers here that were full in the year 2019 are all 80% empty now. So if you want to invest in Panama, now's the time. You could buy a whole building for maybe 17, 18 million bucks, turn into high-end condominiums. And, hey, anybody who wants to invest in a hockey rink down here, I can guarantee you it'll make 12 million bucks a year just in public skating and only 12 hours a day. We've done the numbers. There's all kinds of investment opportunities here, folks. But it's sad that all those office towers are sitting there empty. And Panamanians, they're in general, they're very polite people. They're not all out go-getters and say like, buy now, buy now. They don't do that. So they're scratching their heads wondering how it is they can fill these towers. I'm here helping them do that. And of course, you know what happens, Rob, when guys like you and I come down to countries like this to invest, stop exploiting poor people. Hey, are you kidding me? Panama is not a poor country, people. Like that canal alone, Rob, just in the fees for the ships to go through the canal is 4.5 billion bucks a year. All right. That's just opening the locks and letting them through. That's not including the storage and the shipping and the side grease deals that go on. There's money galore coming in. It's not a poor place, people. But at the same time, they don't trust anything here except for the US dollar. Isn't that interesting? Panamanians actually, and Colombians are the same way, and so are the Nicaraguans. They don't trust any form of currency except for the US dollar. The Costa Ricans are the exception. They love Bitcoin, but everybody else wants US. Maybe you could reflect on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm with Charlie Munger. He's unfortunately deceased and passed away, or Warren Buffett. This is according to them. They said if all the Bitcoin was offered to them for $25, they still wouldn't buy it. And the reason they said that is because they said there's nothing back in it. It's, if you have an electromagnetic pulse, for example, poof, that stuff's gone. So, I understand, that in Holland centuries ago, people got really excited about tulips, and there was a tulip bubble. And I accept that, once upon a time, salt, was used to preserve meat. And so the word salary comes from salt, right? Seashells have been used as money. So barley was the first form of currency because you could flood out the fields, in Egypt in the Nile, and the salinity wouldn't affect the ability to grow barley crops. So, there's other things that are used for currency for sure. But, it's hard to beat gold or silver or oil. We basically had a petrodollar since 1971, 72. Those are real. Copper. The Roman Empire had a copper coin, and of course we've had copper coins. So that stuff's all very tangible. It's got thousands of years of track record. Hard to beat.
All right. Well, I can say this, that with Latin Americans having so much faith in the US dollar, and now with Trump in office, the Japanese are happy. The Italians are happy. I can tell you that the smart Panamanians are happy. So everyone's happy with this. I honestly think we're going to see quite the spending spree taking place, especially in a place like Panama, where retail, it's the culture here. There's more retail stores here than I've ever seen anywhere else in the world. And they're all throwing down greenbacks and they all absolutely love it. But I do want to talk about China here because everyone's saying it's World War III because of China. I'm saying, well, hold on a second here. The Chinese are not going to send nukes. They don't have enough to be as big a threat to the United States as they would like everyone to think that they are. No, it's going to be an economic war. But I'll tell you what I'm thinking here on China. You can tell me if I'm right or wrong. Is they have a problem with their infrastructure projects. They're building them like garbage. They're actually, they call it tofu construction, where they're actually mixing gypsum and cardboard into concrete mix. and there are people leaning on walls, and the walls just give up. They just give in. And entire floors in buildings are just collapsing downwards because there's no rebar in this garbage concrete they're using. The Three Gorges Dam, which it has so much water weight behind it, it actually slowed the planet down by 0.0000001 second. That's how much weight there is behind that dam. And it's bulging in the middle. They didn't build it properly. Their EV sales are down, and nobody wants to buy these things anymore because they're all catching on fire. China has built 5 cities inside their country and 1 in Malaysia. Nobody lives in these cities. No one's moving into them. So you, sir, as a banking expert, maybe you could tell us what you think is going on with China with all these problems.
Yeah, well, some very tangible things. First off, rioting. China has an incredibly repressive system, but people can't get their money out of the banks, right? So that's a huge hallmark of economic problems. One of the ways that you can figure out just how bad central bank digital currency is and all the manipulation behind it and everything else, just look at the Chinese digital yuan. It is by far the most advanced, comprehensively used domestically, central bank digital currency. And what you look at there is the Chinese would rather have a home in Shaughnessy and Vancouver sprouting up weeds than they would have their money in a bank in China, because they can't trust their government. It'll expire. Literally, if you complain about the government, you can't travel, get a bus ticket, a train ticket, a plane ticket. They can seize your pet, for God's sakes, if you're not, complying with their social credit stuff. So it's insanity. So people are desperate to get their money out of that system. And yeah, the corruption in China probably beats the corruption in Russia, and that says a lot. And so, traditionally, the reason that the Han rose, that the reason that the Chinese culture rose, was because they had to deal with the flooding of their various, Yangtze and Yellow Rivers and everything else. Arnold Toynbee talks about this in terms of the study of history. And so that's what forces the Han to really kind of rise above, because they have to deal with this flooding issue. Well, if the Three Gorges Dam goes, and it's looking like it will, that is a massive economic, political, everything catastrophe, humanitarian, whatever, for China, and it'll set them back tremendously, no doubt about it.
Well, certainly. All right, now they're also spending a ton of dough in China on building islands in the South China Sea because of the 200 nautical mile distance. You own the ocean 200 nautical miles off of the coast of your country. It's difficult to judge when countries overlap. But Chinese are out there building islands, declaring them Chinese territory, and now that 200-mile radius expands, and it goes right into Taiwan's and the Philippines and Vietnam's water space. So they're putting money into this, and while they're doing this, they're building buildings that fall apart, and they're building towns that are sinking into these inexplicable sinkholes. What could they possibly do to actually be part of the world economy now that Trump has made the deal to get them out of Panama, and the rest of the world is realizing the Chinese stuff sucks? Let me hear it.
Well, once upon a time, China had the benefit of having some of the lowest wages in the world. But now Mexico is actually cheaper than China wage-wise. So tons of companies that have gone over to China and have been screwed with in terms of copyright, trademark. You think of pharmaceutical companies like Bayer, et cetera, going over there, hoping that they were going to get a good deal on labor, and knowing that they only had like one official to bribe, as opposed to India, where there were multiple things, because it's kind of a more diffuse culture and more reliable energy or whatever. But the problem is that the labor costs have gone up, and you got to ship it across a whole ocean. So if you can, set up a deal where you're manufacturing whatever it is in Mexico, you have far greater proximity to the United States and just broader North American market. China's got troubles. China's got problems for sure. Whether it's just massive corruption. One of the biggest problems, obviously, is just the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, that desperate structure trying to hold on to power that watched as Nicolae Ceausescu was literally strung up in 1989 when the wall came down. They're desperately trying to hold on, and it's holding them back. It's almost a feudalistic type of structure economically, where unless you have connections to the Chinese Communist Party, you don't flourish.
Right.
I could tell stories about the stuff that I saw when I was in, Dubai, for example. With Chinese goods that were being sold over there that told you very clearly where they stood in terms of supporting terrorism and that type of thing. They've got troubles for sure.
Okay, so do we just sit back and watch them implode, or do we have to worry about the fact that there might be some type of conventional or tactical nuclear war between the two? Your thoughts?
Well, China, it kind of vacillates between overly emotional and very, very long-term thinking. So one does have to give credit, because Asian culture generally thinks over very long periods of time. They can be more forward thinking about that, and they don't have to worry about elections. They don't have them, right? So they can just implement their 5-year plans or whatever and, go thumping along. But there are times when they get overly emotional with regard to how they're going to deal with something. And that's where they differ somewhat from the Russians, because the Russians are, much more a chess playing, kind of longer term, longer thinking, less of a short fuse culture generally. I think that China will. It's a brittle structure, and I don't think that has a long-term stability to it. I think that there will be trouble there, whether it's just for example, in terms of the currency, the economy, the labor rates going up. I think all those things are going to pose real problems for them. And I think that, Trump and Steve Bannon and those folks very seriously taking into account the threat that China is. Like there are threats, in terms of, say, for like Islamic terrorism, Russia irredentism, whatever. But if you look at how proactive the Chinese are, for example, in terms of space-based weapons, their wizards mace weapons and stuff, I think, the United States rightfully sees them as a greater threat than some of these others. And at least Steve Bannon and other people, like some of their naval intelligence people, understand that. And if Trump takes action on that, and maybe even deprives them of, say, for example, favored nation status in terms of trade, that's going to be a serious problem for the Chinese.
Well, if America just stopped letting Chinese ships dock in their ports and stopped allowing Chinese goods to be sold, I think that would absolutely crush them. The Americans are the number one consumers on the planet. I mean, the best part about Americans, and God bless you Americans for this, I love you for it, is if you like something or someone, you break out the cash and you just dole it out. You'll get more of it. Very much opposite the way Canada functions, which is why I'm not in Canada anymore, people. I just couldn't stand the idea that I'm a public figure in Canada for 8 years now, and you don't make money there, like nothing, right? So America has that. And if you're able to break into the US market, you will be wealthy, just because they've got 370 million plus people in a consumerist economy and culture. Do you think that Trump is going to stop their ships from going to port? Is this something that he's considering?
Well, I think it makes sense to try to repatriate a lot of American jobs or businesses from China back to the United States, or even to a surrogate, in a sense, like cheaper labor in Mexico, because the violations that the Chinese do in terms of copyright and trademark are just ridiculous. What's common over there is they'll bring a business in, promise them cheap labor, access to seaports, cheap electricity, etc., whatever. The business will set up. They'll very craftily set it up so that the managers are actually Chinese, and that you're not allowed to export any profits. And then businesses have to be very slick about how they, say, for example, take a part that is overvalued and export it so that they can take the money out, in a sense, through goods rather than cash. And then the Chinese eventually just go ahead and steal the trademark and the copyrights and whatever patents, and then just start producing stuff across the street which is undermining, these various things that might have a technological or pharmaceutical or whatever edge. So I think that'll come back to burn them. I think a lot of these companies will have seen that, they went over there thinking, dreaming that they were going to have access to this billion-person market, and it turns out that's not really what happened. I think the country that understands that the best is actually Taiwan, because Taiwan has long time romantically thought of itself as the real China. And they thought that by using their money and their smarts and their advantage with regard to, say, for example, microchips, they were going to be able to, in a sense, invert and overthrow Chinese communism to make it more like them. And instead, they just watched their money disappear over there, and their own security be eroded, subverted by the mainland Chinese. So if you want to learn from anybody about how that doesn't work in terms of this billion-person market, it's the Taiwanese. They could write books about this stuff.
It's funny that you say that, because we used to crack jokes when I was a kid, back in grade 2, grade 3. We're talking the mid 1970s, that every time you saw some kind of junky toy or some novelty, it was always made in Taiwan, always. Right. And we as kids, we didn't know where that was, didn't know what it meant. And we would listen to my father, my uncle, whatnot. The damn Taiwanese, because nobody knew. But I'm thinking back to my son contacts me saying, "Hey, Pops, I found all kinds of your old toys from the 70s. I said, "Oh yeah, where was it made?" "Taiwan." And I said, "Show them to me." I'm thinking that's all the highest quality stuff I had. They used to make dynamite stuff back then. So I guess you're right. The Taiwanese tried to sell their products to the Chinese, but the communist government doesn't allow free enterprise. And the Chinese government's building junk all over the country in the way of infrastructure that crumbles. And they are repressing the people something fierce, to the point now where you're not allowed to be rich for a long period of time. This is a new trend they've got going on. The Chinese will say that if you're famous, you're only allowed to be famous for a short time, and then they'll just remove you. They'll kill all your social media and remove you from the spotlight by force. There's no free market enterprise there at all. So this Xi Jinping guy, who's in charge of the country, who's got this massively weak ego, when you called him Winnie the Pooh and he lost his mind, he banned Disney movies in his country because people called him Winnie the Pooh. This is the guy that's in charge of your country. So where could the country possibly go with this?
Yeah, well, these dictatorships are always so brittle, right? So you've got this control freak, and you can't. How do you have, whether it's 1.3 or 700 million or whatever statistic the Chinese are pushing out there these days? You can't have that large an economy that's all dictated and run by one man. Like it's insanity. And Russia's facing the same type of scenario, right? Like it's a terrible design.
Right.
And so, yeah, that will not go well. Like that's not going to end well. It's a brittle system. And when these dictators die, there's always a power struggle. And so that's going to be ugly, both in Russia's case and in China's case. It's probably good for Ukraine. Like if Putin was to kick the bucket tomorrow, all of a sudden there'd be a power struggle in Russia, and they would be so internally focused that they probably couldn't, tie their shoelaces together with regard to what they're doing in Ukraine, and that would probably end that. So, good for Ukraine if Putin kicks off. But yeah, both those countries. And here's a problem for us, is if you have a Russian banking crisis, a Chinese banking crisis, which they're both well set up for, people demanding, to get their money out of the Chinese banks, the digital yuan not doing very well, causing problems, the Russian economy, the ruble crashing below a penny American type of thing and keeping going south. If those credit systems fail, the worry is, will it cause a ripple effect across the rest of the banking system? That's a problem.
Well, how far do you think that ripple would go if the Chinese yuan doesn't do well, or the banks crash? What happens to the rest of the world's banking?
Well, okay, so let's look at this. Let me talk about currency and monetary policy just for a second. Sure. About that. So here's a problem, folks. There's inflation. And if the governments actually go ahead, the central banks actually go ahead and raise interest rates, they kill themselves. Like you can raise interest rates for a month, maybe 2 months, but you probably can't keep it going for 3, because if you do, it kills your ability to refinance your own debt, makes it too expensive, and bankrupts the country. Problem. So all you can really do is raise interest rates for a month or two and then bring them back down so that the refinancing of your own debt doesn't strangle you. Now, if there's an economic downturn, China, Russia, our economy, okay, normally what you do, Keynesian economics, etc., whatever, you cut interest rates to stimulate spending. Problem is, if you cut the interest rates, nobody buys the bonds and the treasury bills. So they already have a problem, both in the United States and other countries. The governments are buying their own debt instruments because right now the markets aren't fully taking them up. Normally, what should happen is the brokers go, oh my gosh, the treasury bills haven't been bought. Problems, panic. But instead, the government step in to buy their own debt instruments. It's insanity. So in that case, they don't have the power to cut interest rates. So you can't raise interest rates like Paul Volcker did when he was chairman of the Federal Reserve in the United States to fight inflation. And you can't substantially cut rates because nobody's going to buy the debt instruments. So the only option you have is to go ahead and deflate the currency, is to go ahead and or inflate, depending on how you look at it. And so as a result, all you do is print money. And when the United States pulled off the gold reserve in 1971, up until 1980, in that decade, the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar shrunk by 75%. So what you could buy in it basically went down to a quarter, right? So the value of your dollar in 1971 was value of what you could buy for a quarter in 1980. And that's what not just the United States is facing, not just Canada, but most of the countries in the world are facing that. And that's the reason why people are seriously looking at gold and silver and other things, because the only option these governments have is to inflate and print money.
Yeah, okay. And we've seen jihadi Justin Trudeau do that. How could Canada, which it had a surplus of $10 billion when Harper left office and Trudeau came into office, and with a country of 40 million people where 11 million are not working because they're unskilled foreigners that just showed up with nothing and they've been given everything, how could you possibly pay that debt? So the Canadian government, like many governments, is just printing cash. You know, Rob, what's terrifying about that is after World War I, I've seen all the archive photographs where children would break into banks and grab all the cash that was in there, not to spend it because it had no value, but to make forts out of it, to play with it like it's Lego. There's look it up for yourselves, everybody who's watching right now. Just jump on Google and look up German children playing with Deutschmarks as toys, because it was 1 million marks had a penny value by the time the war was done, because they just kept printing it. The Canadian dollar is doing the same thing. So now let's talk about Trump versus Canada here. There's so much Canadian money floating around the world, not inside the Canadian economy. Do you think that Trump has considered that? And if so, what plan does he have for that?
Well, Canada's got nothing backing its currency, right? Like, we have no gold bullion reserves. We're one of 12 countries in the world that has absolutely nothing. And we had, like I said, a strong financial position, even stronger than there was vis-a-vis the United States probably in 1960. Canada used to have a free banking system from 1817 to 1914. We were the best banking systems in the world, but now we're in serious trouble. So, there's been this, threat of tariffs, which really was because Trump wanted us to fix our border security issues, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. But, if he just pulled a Millet, and if he cut stupid spending in the United States and got rid of woke progressive programs, what would happen is money would flood into the United States, including Canadian money, a lot of it. And our dollar would slump. The only thing that Canada has going for it is our beautiful trade relationship that we have with the largest market in the world, the United States of America. When Mulroney was in and conducting the free trade agreements, 80% of our trade was with the United States, foreign trade. Now it's about 60%, which is still a massive chunk. If there's anything that threatens that, that's the only thing we've got going to prop up the Canadian dollar. That's it. If the Canadian dollar really fell into a slump and that trade relationship went south, or we had just a tremendous downturn in our economy, all Trump would have to do is say, well, listen, Canada, I'm willing to let you swap out Canadian dollars for American dollars. And if that dollar keeps on dropping, there's a lot of Canadians that say, done. You know, like the
I'd be the front of that line, Rob. Really,
yeah,
the front of that line, I'd be there.
I've had discussions with some of my intelligent friends about this, and I'm just going to run through like the mistakes that Canada's made over the years. Okay, and it goes back a long time. So, you know, we used to have, for example, the Winnipeg Grain Exchange was actually bigger than the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. But what did we do? We went ahead and centralized it, created the Canadian Wheat Board, bought wheat off of farmers for below international market value, and sold it subsidized to China through Canada Steamship Lines, Par Martin's, you know, the Martin family's company, okay, with a monopoly contract on that. Foolish. Killed a perfectly good grain exchange that would have, you know, potentially been bigger than the Chicago Mercantile. Insanity. We created the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which employs 50% of all the radio and television journalists in the country. You know, effectively kneecapping the ability to have, you know, a lot of private sector do a lot of that type of stuff, etc. Then, for example, you know, we gave up on the Avro Arrow, and a lot of those engineers went south to the United States. You know, we were sold at the time at the idea that, you know, it was intercontinental ballistic missiles and long-range bombers weren't necessary. Well, long-range bombers are still around, and we lost that key sector of the economy. You know, we could have been a nuclear power. We had a Minister of National Defense, Doug Harkless, and wanted Canada to be in that realm, and instead we chose to play pacifist with regard to that. We had, like I said, the gold reserves in 1960; those have all been sold off. We elected communist sympathizer like Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and his son's not much better. You know, we've had all these left-leaning, you know, kind of prime ministers, etc. And then, you know, we had this opportunity with oil and natural gas to sell to Germany, Japan, South Korea, you know, all these countries. And what did we do? Kill pipeline after pipeline because of woke environmentally, you know. So we've set ourselves up for failure in so many ways that we could have been an economic powerhouse. But instead, every single time, every one of these, you know, instances I give you over several decades, we've literally undermined our national sovereignty.
Something I can say to that, Rob, is, you know, that I lived in the United States for almost 5 years in my 20s, and I've been to 12 different countries looking for business opportunities. I can tell you this, out of all the countries I've been to, including Thailand and Myanmar, Canadians have the least amount of business acumen. Everybody around the world wants to get products in the store, get the price tags on them, get them sold, get them out, bring more in. It's this revolution of goods. It is this hunger to bring it in, sell it, get it out, get more in. The Canadian way of doing things is, oh, hey, everything kind of just arrived yesterday, so yeah, we'll unpack it tomorrow. And tomorrow shows up, oh, wait, hey, Leaf game's on. That's what happens. Canadians are not hungry. They're not eager to go and make money. I'll give you just a very simple example of what I'm talking about. You want to talk about lack of business acumen. There are a lot of Canadian podcasters who, post-COVID, are doing quite well, where they've got over 100,000 subscribers. I, as you can tell here, I'm a Canadian tax expert. I do a lot of taxes for a lot of people and get them back a lot of money. And I want to advertise on these Canadian podcasts, a 30-second commercial at the beginning of their shows. All of them said the same thing. Nah, we don't take advertising. We don't want to appear like we're some kind of conglomerate. Are you kidding me? Well, what are you doing it for? Why would you spend 40 hours a week having a podcast and collect no money? Do you think somebody cares that you're not taking money for what you do? That it's the whole country thinks like this. So that is why Canadians are not taking advantage of and exploiting their own natural resources. Potash, diamonds, golds, copper, nickel, phosphorus, oil, beef, fresh water, you know, and Canada produces so much electricity that we actually have to pay the Americans to take it from us and put it into their grid. We don't even know how to make money on producing too much electricity. So I can't be in Canada because I cannot be around that type of thought process. That thinking is why everyone's broke. So everyone wants to blame Trudeau. My life sucks because of Trudeau. Well, did you look in the mirror? Do you think like an American or a Chinese businessman? Hunger, money, now, money now. That's how I think. I'm talking like Kevin O'Leary now. I want to make money. Everything I do has got to make money. I have not been on a date with a woman for a year and a half because it costs money to do that. I'm not making money when I'm wasting my time having these conversations. But Canadians don't think this way. So they're in a lot of trouble. And that is the only concern. And you can reflect on this one now. My only concern, if some Canadian provinces join the USA, will that crazy non-hunger for success begin to rub off on the Americans? Go ahead.
Well, the Nixon administration did a study during the Quiet Revolution in Quebec in the 1960s and figured out that what they really wanted was a land bridge to Alaska. And you can understand that. Sarah Palin, I've talked with, she had to literally drive through Canada all the time, going back and forth to her state type of thing, which, we're grateful to have her visiting, and buying gas and whatever, and, all that stuff. So I understand that. Alaska and Hawaii were admitted as the 50th and 49th state in 1948. Their financial position, there were people in Alaska who didn't want to become the 50th state. And the reason they didn't was because at that point, Alaska was a territory. It was protectorate, like a Guam, like a Puerto Rico, like the American Virgin Islands, like the Philippines used to be, like Panama used to be. And so the upside of that was that nobody paid federal income tax. The only people who did were the ones who worked for the federal government. Nobody else did. So you imagine if all of a sudden you shave 20%, 22%, whatever off your taxes, pretty sweet, right?
Yeah.
Alberta was in a situation under Ralph Klein where we had an MLA for Calgary North Hill, Richard Magnus, who was proposing that we eliminate provincial income tax. It's now sitting around 10%. It's still one of the lowest in the country. But if we eliminated that and just had oil royalties, for example, that would put Alberta, if you didn't have to pay federal income tax and you didn't have a state or territorial, whatever, provincial income tax, all of a sudden, Alberta would be the lowest tax jurisdiction in North America. It would be lower than Wyoming and lower than Alaska. Money would flood into the province of Alberta. So, there's a lot to be said for that because Albertans overpay in terms of equalization, billions and billions of dollars. We're owed by the federal government hundreds of billions of dollars in terms of our overpayments for Canada Pension Plan and everything else. Alberta would become the per capita wealthiest jurisdiction in North America. It's pretty compelling.
Well, I guess I'll just put this up saying to President Trump or anybody working for the Trump administration, could you maybe consider making Alberta a state, or better yet, as Rob Anders just said, a protectorate? Because Alberta is a beautiful province and should not be part of Canada any longer. There's no reason for it to do so. And I still have my Alberta driver's license. So should a protectorate situation happen, I'm an American national that same day. And for all the Americans watching right now, I'm a Canadian citizen who had to escape, didn't just leave for fun. I had to escape communist Canada because there were 7 attempts on my life as a journalist and 7 months of prison time for just telling stories online that I could back. Rob, I did prison time for telling people don't take COVID vaccines. And now the same province, which was Alberta, that locked me up for that, has just come out and said, everybody, there was no COVID. Like the province admits this now. So, I'm just saying that for the Americans who are watching, Canada is pretty bad, especially the provinces of Ontario and Quebec. And if the Trump administration is watching, I would very much love to be an American national because that day I would turn over my Canadian passport and say goodbye forever. There's no reason to be in Canada at all as a Canadian citizen with ambition and drive. And I think there's a lot of Canadians out there who share that sentiment. When you have drive and ambition in a communist country, they'll crush you. They're crushing people in China and they're crushing people in Canada. And when I explain that to Panamanians down here, typically through a translator, they're blown away. they actually say, I want to go to Canada because Canada says there's gold on the streets. Saying, no, there's death on the streets. That's about it. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, Bjorn Borg left Sweden because the taxes were too high. There's a number of people who've left the United Kingdom because taxes were too high, and Canada is no exception to that. People leaving Canada because they just don't want to put up with the taxes anymore. No, it's a very sad scenario, and that's why so many of our entertainers and people who, earn good money for their abilities, their merit, leave Canada and go to the United States because it's just a cheaper tax jurisdiction, and your money goes further. Your purchasing power is more, etc. I mean, you just look at gasoline. There's tons of people who will go across the border, whether it's Point Roberts in British Columbia or whatnot, to buy gasoline in the U.S. because it's cheaper. When I used to travel to Ottawa, going from Alberta out to Ottawa to take a vehicle out there, I would travel mostly through the United States because there were more gas stations and it was cheaper.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of Canadian border towns where people go to the United States Costco's and do all their shopping there, and they'll stay overnight. It's cheaper to go to the United States, get a motel, stay overnight with your wife or significant other, shop the next day, and go home. Because if it's 24 hours or more, there's no taxes on the groceries you're bringing back in.
Right.
And
I was born in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I have relatives in Winnipeg who do exactly that. Go down to Fargo and buy stuff and come back, and it saves them money.
How pathetic is your country when people literally drive to another country to shop for milk and bread and butter? That's pathetic.
Yes. I mean, look at the price of cheese. Max Bernier was addressing this, for example, during his leadership bid. He was talking about supply management. I remember one time I was in a cheese factory in Ontario. I think it's London, Ontario. It was during the Perth Middlesex by-election. And we put on the little, hats to make sure your hair didn't get anything. And I was asking the guys, I said, so what would happen if we actually had got rid of supply management and allowed American cheese up here? And he said 90% of the Canadian cheese manufacturing would go under because it's been so cross-subsidized with supply management that most of the companies couldn't compete. It's just sad. Like we've literally kind of grown up on a lot of kind of interventionist, subversive socialism. And Alberta, we've been subsidizing socialism across the rest of the country. Quebec daycare is because of the equalization payments that we pay out. The Canada Pension Plan, if Alberta wasn't contributing, we over-contribute by $3 billion a year. We over-contribute to employment insurance by about $300 million a year. We have been subsidizing these social programs and this socialism across the rest of the country, and we were just drunk on oil money and allowing it to happen. I remember Bloc Québécois MPs, when I was first elected in the 1990s, saying, why do you guys put up with this? Quebec does our own thing, and we're not even as economically viable as you are. Why do you do it? They were right. We've been subsidizing the rest of the country with ridiculous social programs and whatever for decades.
Yeah, and for our American friends who are currently watching the show, Canada is full-blown communist. It really is that bad. And the vast majority of the Canadian economy is subsidized by the government, which is not government money. It's taxpayers' money. To the point now, America, if you're planning on moving to Canada, I wouldn't do it. I'll tell you why. It's because your tax bill will be up to 73% of everything you make by the time you're paying your income tax, your Canada Pension Plan, employment insurance, provincial income tax. You got regional taxes in some cases. Now you've got property tax, you've got entertainment tax, liquor tax, you've got fuel tax. There is tax on tax. And if you're in the province of Quebec, whatever you buy anywhere in that province, Rob, it's crazy. You buy something in the province of Quebec, the federal government puts 5% tax on that. And then the Quebec government puts tax on top of that taxed number. Nobody can survive. Now, we did income taxes for 605 people last year in Canada. Now, half of that was corporate. And as soon as I put these corporations into a plan, an actual tax-free plan, I can get Canadians to never pay tax again legally. The second that we did that, they all got profitable within 3 months. All of them, completely and totally above board, not just surviving, but actually making money and putting it in the bank. 3 months of no tax. That's how much tax there is in Canada. So
I remember one time I was at a kind of a Austrian school economics, Ludwig von Mises kind of institute situation we had here in Calgary, a luncheon. And there was one of the Johnston brothers presented this, and he said, in ancient Rome, when they were trying to crush Carthage, they imposed the heaviest level of taxes in the ancient world, from which they thought Carthage could never possibly recover, and that was 10%. And you think how high taxes are in Canada compared to 10%. Alberta has the lowest income tax in Canada at 10%. I think that we should have some sort of constitutional amendment where there can be no tax above 10%. Because if it's good enough for God, it's good enough for government.
No. Yeah, 10% is considerably better, but it doesn't change the fact that in the province of Alberta, Rob, you and I had a good laugh about this. I moved to the city of Calgary from Toronto, and I did that in February of 2021. Now, I shouldn't eat Doritos, but come on, man. The guacamole ones, they're the best. All right. A bag of Doritos, the big bags, those big bags of Doritos at the time were $2.99. Now, by the time I left Calgary in November of 2023, that's just 2.5 years later, the same bag of Doritos is $10. A roasted chicken is between $25 and $35. One. And I am buying 5-pound chickens here for roasting at $2.80 a piece in Panama. A whole chicken, not just a little chicken breast thing that's sitting in a roaster. So, yeah, Alberta might have low taxes compared to the rest of the country, but the food prices are ridiculous. And it's all artificial. There's no reason for it to be that high. So here's a question I've got for you in reference to high prices. When you look at a house in Toronto or Vancouver, they're garbage. They're built like crap. But they're $1.5 to $2.5 million for a 2,000 square foot house. But compare that to Houston or Dallas or Austin or even the Tampa Bay area, same house is $250,000. Now, you and I both know that the entire housing market in Canada is inflated deliberately through money laundering. And the theory is that if money laundering was actually made a properly illegal thing in Canada, the entire housing market would tank, and so would the food market. Could I get your commentary on that, please?
Yeah, it's been commented on by a lot of people other than myself that our real estate market is ridiculously inflated. You know, the U.S. had a big correction in 2007, 2008 with Freddie Mae, Fannie Mac, and AIG and what have you. And I'll tell you what went on. We had Canadian mortgage companies, banks that were terribly exposed to the subprime crisis in the United States and Mexico, for that matter. And what happened was Mark Carney, along with Stephen Harper as Prime Minister, Mark Carney is Governor of the Bank of Canada, went ahead and took the worst aspects of the Canadian Charter Bank's mortgage debts and had them purchased by 3 different entities. It was the U.S. Federal Reserve to some extent because some of them were American mortgages. Some of them were by Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, and some of them by the Bank of Canada. We would have had bank failures in Canada, but this was all done under the radar. And then when the market settled down, they were, retransferred type of thing. But the Canadian banking system survived the subprime crisis in the U.S. because of that kind of under, the radar subterfuge. The correction that happened in 2007, 2008 in the United States has still not happened in Canada. And that there's a shoe that is waiting to drop.
So imagine, this is one I've actually been thinking about here. Imagine Donald Trump, who actually is entirely fed up with the entire Canadian government, all of it. Imagine he finds a way to stop money laundering in Canada. How quickly would the housing market crash in the entire country?
Well, the 2 biggest ones obviously are Toronto and Vancouver. Vancouver, like I said, it's all that Chinese money that is desperately looking to get out from the crazy scenarios of central bank digital currency, digital yuan in China. We would have a major correction. The U.S. probably had, a 30% correction in 2007, 2008. The Canadians, we skated through that. Would the correction be even bigger? Would it be 35, 40%? I'm not sure.
Well, I can say a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money.
Yeah.
A lot of people are going to lose a lot of. And one of the things,
and that's what I tell people, that have 100,000, 200,000, 600,000, whatever it is, in GICs, treasury bills, bonds, bank, debt instruments, whatever. Watch out. I saw people come into my constituency office back in like 2007, just before it all went down. And they were facing bail-ins where they were losing this stuff because of the fine print, okay, with regard to bail-in contracts on this stuff. And they were money just pixie dust, eliminating. And I worry for a lot of people in Canada. They don't understand how compromised the system is. It's not a bail-in. It's now a bail. Sorry, it's now a bail-in. It's not a bailout. It's a bail-in. So in order for those banks to save themselves, they're going to take those depositors' money and solidify their own equity type of thing. And the depositors are the ones who are going to lose out when they read the fine print. And so there's a real storm coming. There's a reason why Warren Buffett has pulled as much money out of the market as he has. He realizes there's a correction coming.
Oh boy. So Canadians who have money in the bank, and the money is at the second lowest it's ever been. The Canadian dollar sucks right now. Oh God, does it suck? What are the chances it could crash before the Bank Act expires in 2.5 years? Any idea?
Well, I think what that's predicated on, and I've said this, just previously tonight, if the Chinese have a dam break, if the Russians have an economic collapse, it's going to cause ripple effects throughout the Forex exchanges. The euro is precarious. They're living on borrowed time. Portugal, Italy, Greece, Spain, the massive debts. Britain's pulling out of it because they don't want to hold the bag. Germany, Frankfurt, the bankers in Frankfurt are pulling out because they don't want to hold the bag. The euro, in my prediction, will collapse. Margaret Thatcher was exactly right back in the 1980s when she said that the European common market made sense because you could buy Czech crystal or British cod or German steel more cheaply because it wasn't paying tariffs to those various countries. That made sense. But the lack of controls and the idea of a European common currency didn't make sense. She was right in the 1980s. She's just as right now. And that will collapse. I just wish I knew exactly when, because you could buy puts and make a fortune.
All right. So we should probably have a financial advice show coming soon. What to buy to avoid the crash. That's not a bad idea. Oh man, it's a lot to, this is a lot to take in, obviously. And really what's going on here, Rob, is that you're hitting me and the audience with the same amount of information that I'll hit my clients with in the 1 hour consultations that I do. And it's truly mind-blowing how little we all know about the financial markets in the world and even what money is at all. So how can we help people here? Is there anything that you and I could say that's magical right now to help the average person comprehend all this?
Yeah, well, I'll take some of the stuff out of the report that I read today from Justice Center, right? Use cash, keep it alive. Because, if you get to a situation where banks don't want to distribute or stores don't want to let you pay in cash, that's a big problem, folks. As well, you can't get around precious metals. Brett Oland and I have talked about this. He gets it. He's one of the adults in the room with regard to this stuff at Bow Valley Credit Union in Alberta. Alberta should actually have its financial institutions commit to 1% of their assets in like gold, silver, maybe copper, oil in Alberta's case, etc., because it's real, it's tangible. Right now, it's based on nothing, folks. There's nothing backing it at all. And if the Canadian dollar continues to drop, it's a disaster waiting to happen. So it's hard to get around precious metals. Weimar Republic Germany, when they started to inflate money, which I said before is the situation all the central banks are in. They can't raise interest rates really to correct inflation. They can only do it in a posturing kind of way because they'll bankrupt themselves. They can't cut the rates because people won't buy their debt instruments. So all they can do is inflate. And that's kind of the Weimar Republic situation they were in, after World War I. So what did they do? They were actually breaking up gold and silver chains so they could buy bread. Little links of gold and silver were what they were using as real currency. So it's hard to get around that, folks. Even the Soviet Union, when they tried to get rid of cash, when they nationalized the banks with Gazbank in 1917, I have an example here. This is what a Russian silver, a Soviet kopeck looks like. They had to revert to this in 1921 because they had 1/13 of the Russian population, 10 million people starving to death. Okay. And in 1923, they had to revert to gold because nobody trusted the Russian banking system. That's how bad it was. That's what it comes down to, folks. That's where it goes.
Okay. Rob, we got folks on Kick here and on TikTok who can't see you. They can only hear you. Could you just remind everybody who you are, please? Go ahead.
Sure. Rob Anders. I was a member of Parliament for 18 and a half years in Ottawa, represented the riding of Calgary West. And I've just gone down the rabbit hole of central bank digital currency in the last few years and put out, lots of emails about this stuff, and just reviewed a report today that was put out by Ben Clausen from the Justice Center on this. I'll be doing some other podcasts coming up with Sharon Polsky, who is one of our people involved with privacy matters in Canada, and also I've done some stuff with Brett Olin with Bull Valley Credit Union. He runs that.
Okay, fantastic. So I also want to tell everyone this. Rob Anders was incredibly helpful when I was running for mayor of Calgary. You had me and a few other candidates for our city council come on over, and you educated the hell out of us on the right way to dress and the right way to present. And Rob, it was unreal. You gave all of us a 45-minute section of your lecture on suits worn by leaders around the world for the psychological impact. Maybe why don't you just tell people a little bit about this? Because the one common denominator was the most successful politicians out there all seem to have blue suit, white shirt, nice colored tie. Let's hear it. You're a former politician. What's the deal with that?
Well, okay. So basically, if you have the same color that goes, for example, from your shoulder down to your heel, a more traditional suit, as opposed to just like a sport jacket and pants, it's a solid color, right? It has a solid, look. I remember we were taught when I was just getting involved with the Reform Party and doing question period in the House of Commons that young guys would want to wear solid, light absorbing colors like cashmere, etc., because it sucked the color in and made you seem more solid. But for older guys in our caucus, like say, for example, John Reynolds, who had been elected, back in, an earlier iteration and returned to the House of Commons, you could get away with more silk and stuff because it kind of gave a youthful, ambiance or vibe to it, etc., whatever. As well, you wanted to, either have a light blue shirt or a white shirt, because that's Beau Brumel's thing about having the clean linen. And your ties, if you look at U.S. presidential debates, a lot of these guys are, governors, senators, etc. You'll see a lot of them wear a red tie, solid red tie, because it seems to be the one that women most gravitate to for that. The black suit is kind of like the clergy, and other examples that you could use. There's some military outfits that are like that. For the blue, it's a classic thing in terms of the police and the military. The gray, once again, there are some militaries that use that, whether it was in the U.S. Civil War or the Germans, etc. So there's certain colors that connotate those things. Bankers will judge you when you go in for applying for a mortgage or a credit card based on whether or not it looks as though you care about your image to the public. And therefore you'll care about whether or not you are in the media or whatever about not paying your loan or your credit, etc. So, the smaller the pattern on your tie, for example, like a pin dot as opposed to a larger kind of comical polka dot, stripes, the rep ties that the English are famous for, the regimental ties. All these things factor into the image that people see of a politician or a banker or what have you.
And the fact that you were able to lecture us for 45 minutes on this with a slideshow showing us the fashion follies out there, gray suits with pinstripes, which did look terrible beside the blue suits. We start to understand, and the reason I brought this up is we begin to understand how easily we are manipulated with just some guy wearing some cloth on a stage. So now, is there any warnings that you would like to give to the public about maybe not giving too much power to what you see and hear on the media? I got to hear your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, so let's take Mark Carney for example.
Sorry. Tell everybody who Mark Carney is, because we have Americans in Britain watching.
Sure. Okay, so Mark Carney was the former governor of the Bank of Canada, hired by Stephen Harper, then hired by the Bank of England, and is now running for the leadership of the Liberal Party of Canada. Looks decent in a suit, but because of that, and because of that pedigree, when he looks down the camera lens and says that he wants to spend 150 trillion with a T dollars on green, on the green agenda, and people nod their heads and think, oh, well, that sounds reasonable. No, that's crazy. That's insanity. That's 100 times the Canadian national debt. It's over 4.5 times the size of the U.S. federal debt. That is an astronomical sum of money. And how's he going to do that? Because the government of Canada doesn't have that money. The government of the United States doesn't have that money. Most governments combined don't have that money. He wants to use central bank digital currency. He is one of the brain children behind this, and use it to manipulate your private finances into his ideas of what you should do with regard to your fuel and your spending and electric vehicles and all this type of stuff. And he does it because, he's smooth and he's slick and he wears a good suit. And he's been a governor of a couple different banks. And so people think, oh, yeah, all right, whatever. But it's really insanity. It's some of the most astronomical sums of money you could possibly imagine for this whole kind of, green pixie dust, DEI progressive kind of stuff, right? Yeah. He actually says he wants to see higher carbon taxes.
All right. So essentially, Mark Carney, who could be the prime minister if Trudeau steps down. This is the lunatic that they're talking about making prime minister for a short while. So let's just say, for argument's sake, he gets in March 1st. The Canadian election is in November. That gives him more than half a year to implement a central bank digital currency. Is that enough time for a crazy man like him to do that?
If we let him. There are countries where they've attempted this, like Nigeria, for example, and they literally are burning effigies in the streets and protesting and causing problems at the banks, because what they do is they get rid of the large currency. They get rid of like the $50 notes, the $100 notes, and people were literally walking around with wheelbarrows full of small, bill currency. It's a terrible scenario. Excuse me, I got something in my throat. And so yeah, this stuff is real. It's what these globalists plan. Mark Carney is one of the brains behind this stuff, and it's going to mean tremendous hardship, not only for Canada, but this guy's going to try to sell it to the European Union and other countries. And we need to have somebody like Donald Trump that says, no, I don't want to have one crypto to rule them all. I don't want central bank digital currency. I don't want to go down this route. See, like China loves this stuff because they know that people want to get their money out of the country. So if you don't have cash and it's merely an agreement between the various central bankers over what the exchange rate is, then it's impossible to go to a cab driver in Shanghai or something and do a different exchange rate than what the government offers. Like that's the thing when you go to like Havana in Cuba, or you go to Venezuela and Caracas. There's what the government offers you as the official exchange rate, and there's what you can do as private deals on the side, which is the real market exchange rate. Well, if you get rid of cash, that's not possible. So dictators love that stuff. Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, they love this stuff because it means that everybody's trapped into their bogus exchange rates that they set by the central banks, and it therefore keeps their currency inflated at a higher rate than what it should be. They love this stuff. But if you love freedom, don't let the dictators win in terms of telling you what the value of your money is. And that's one of the reasons we should go back to the idea of having a precious metal and a fractional reserve, because that's the way you really preserve wealth.
If Mark Carney gets in, do you think Trump's going to let him stay in office?
Well, Donald Trump rightfully had problems with Justin Trudeau, as we all, only 20% of Canadians still support the guy, who they are, whatever. I mean, even the Liberals are turning on him, thank goodness. Mark Carney is bad. He's going to make Trudeau look good, because Trudeau is kind of this, guy who reads his talking points. But Mark Carney is more of a globalist. He's more of one of their actual prodigies and brains behind this type stuff. If Trudeau looked down at Camera Liz and said he wanted to allocate $150 trillion to green initiatives, people would laugh. They would laugh if Stephen Guilbeault said that as a minister in charge of the environment in Canada. But when Carney does it, they're actually taking it credibly. And the problem is he could actually bamboozle some of the Europeans and others into thinking this is a plausible idea. So he's more dangerous than Trudeau. Smoother, slicker, more dangerous.
Is he really that charismatic that he could say, to just literally go to some place and say, hey, we're going to go between 10 and 100 times our current national debt to build green energy, and have everyone say, like, yeah? Is he really that slick?
I'm not sure it's that he's charismatic in the sense that he believes he's got well, maybe he does. Maybe he does sense he has a divine mission or some sort of, otherworldly, element to him to do this. And this is his mission while he's here on Earth. Maybe. But I think the problem is he's the gray man. He's what they refer to in intelligence and espionage communities as kind of the guy who just, floats there and doesn't get noticed and whatever, and doesn't ruffle feathers. Like Trudeau can come across as a clown, right? He puts on blackface. He wears inappropriate headgear. He appropriates other cultures and kind of dresses up. Like, he's played Mr. Dress Up. But Mark Carney's not going to be that stupid. He's never shown that before. And so he's just more credible. And people are going to buy this stuff. Like, if I had to have if the forces of evil were looking for a salesperson for central bank digital currency, it's not Justin Trudeau, right? He's too laughable. But with Mark Carney, it's much more dangerous.
Well, he terrifies me, this guy. And should Mark Carney get in, and please, Uncle Trump, if you are watching this, you go remove him by force. And yeah, man, I was in a court case. This is back in 2021. Conveniently, there was a court case brought against me while I was running for mayor of Calgary, because I was the only real conservative guy saying, don't get needles, don't put on masks. We're going to put the whole city back to work when I'm mayor. So conveniently, someone who was funding Justin Trudeau to the tune of $100 million decided to just magically sue me for defamation of character right in the middle of my campaign. And of course, the entire left-wing audience focused on the fact that I got sued by a guy who's Muslim when his faith had nothing to do with any of the truths that we had divulged about this guy in our media. Well, where it gets insane is there was absolutely no evidence brought in this court case that I had said anything that was untrue. But the lawyer, his name is Jonathan Lysis. He prides himself on being a lawyer of 29 years. The guy's the biggest wimp I've ever met in my life. Tough in court because he's got the judge to protect him. But out in the public, wow, coward. This guy says, Your Honor, Mr. Johnston here has once said to Donald Trump that he would like to see Donald Trump come in and annex Canada, take over Ottawa, and remove the Canadian government by force. Now, and we just can't allow a man who's calling on a foreign government to interfere in our great nation, because he was a left-wing individual who likes to raise money for the pedo people. And I've got evidence on that one too. And the judge saw red when I was accused of saying, which I did say, by the way, I did say, Trump, please remove everybody from Ottawa. But that's all it takes in a left-wing country to get an 18-month jail sentence in Canada for defamation. Sorry, not even defamation. It was contempt of court, because I was asking Trump to fix the country. That's how pathetic it is. So obviously I can't be in Canada because they're going to keep doing it. Right? What is there any solution to guys like Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau and this Jonathan Lysis guy and all these extremist left-wing maniacs shutting down freedom of speech and shutting down the conservative economy? Is there any solution that we have to this at all? as a nation? Please go ahead.
Well, I actually think that Justin Trudeau can legitimately be charged with treason. Like, not joking. If you go ahead and you allow the People's Liberation Army of China to have operatives inside our highest level biohazards lab in Winnipeg and have them export coronavirus to the labs in Wuhan, and then go ahead and add gain of function to it to make it more deadly. Now, you might be able to argue that he was just an idiot and he was naive to allow that to happen. But once you've been informed by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, etc., that that's what went on,
right?
And then after that, you go and buy jabs off of China that you know have been weaponized, and you buy enough of them, 8 doses for every man, woman, and child in Canada. If that's not treason, I'm not sure I know what is, right? So that's a legitimate charge that can be brought against him. And I think, Alberta just put out a report by Dr. Davidson, whom I met with, who left his emergency medicine position. He was in charge of emergency medicine in Red Deer for all central Alberta. He went down to Texas, learned the protocols with regard to hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, vitamin D, etc. Came back, treated friends of mine, including former member of Parliament Eric Lowther. And he was threatened with having his medical licenses, his doctor's license removed. This guy has been involved now in a report. The report is scathing. I was at a meeting on Thursday last week. If somebody had 2 Pfizer jabs, they are 10 times more likely to have had myocarditis. If they had 2 Moderna jabs, they're 14 times more likely to have myocarditis. If they had 1 Pfizer jab and 1 Moderna jab, a mixture of the jabs, they're 36 more times likely to have suffered myocarditis. Wow. Of the pregnant women who were jabbed, 87.5% spontaneously aborted. And of children who were jabbed, there was a 3,328% increase in infant mortality death. The man who was responsible for that and allowed that to happen, encouraged it, invested in it, Justin Trudeau.
So what he's essentially done, because then this is a tax and money show, is he has crushed the economy for a full generation there, because that's a whole bunch of children who won't be born to eventually get jobs and pay taxes and contribute. So that is unto itself treason, just eliminating a swath of the populace who could conceivably carry on keeping an economy flowing. And the reason I bring that up is it was once told to me by an economist back in 1988 that Canada needs another 100 million people. At the time, I think the population was about 28 million. It needs another 100 million productive, intelligent, driven people to build a proper international economy. And, here we are with 40 million, but 11 million are imports from Africa, the Middle East, and China who don't speak English. And if you want a prime example of that, when I fight the Canada Revenue Agency, there's 30,000 diversity hires from Africa that nobody understands. It's bizarre that he has eliminated all of Canadian culture and all hope of an economy in Canada. So, question then, could Trump fix the Canadian economy if he chose to annex the country?
Well, so the guy who's really got this right in terms of fixing this stuff is Milei in Argentina. If Trump and crew go down that path and get rid of the DEI and get rid of, the overspending and get rid of the waste and drain the swamp and all the stuff that he probably wishes he'd done in his first term in 2016, it's going to be huge. And there's going to be a ton of Canadian money who just decides to leave Canada and go to that. There's no doubt about that. And frankly, we need that done in Canada. The Liberals aren't going to do it. Trudeau didn't do it. Carney's not going to do it. Freeland's not going to do it. Will Pierre do it? I hope so. Even with Harper, the bureaucracy grew The CBC grew. So we need it. We need it bad. Like I said, we've got a housing bubble that's about to burst, and we need somebody who's going to come in and really right size the Canadian government. I mean, talking about the CRA, I could do that. We could do a whole show on that. But they actually have more people employed in the CRA than the entire Canadian military. It's ridiculous.
And for our American friends, that's the Canada Revenue Agency. They're kind of like the IRS, except really, really dumb, and they don't have guns, and they actually don't have any authority whatsoever. And this I know because I fight the Canada Revenue Agency every single day. And you know what? In a fight against the CRA, Rob, I've got the boxing gloves on, and they haven't even shown up for the fight yet. That's how pathetic they really are. And I'm educating a lot of people on that. So we've covered quite a bit in the last 95 minutes here. So now what we got to do here is offer solutions. So let's talk to our Canadian friends first. How do they keep money in their pocket? Aside from having me get your taxes back for the last 10 years, everyone, which I can do, how do Canadians protect what they have? Go ahead.
I think one of the best things you can do is if there is a relatively local gold mining or silver mining company, to get involved in that, because gold and silver are precious metals, and they just they're the resilient things. What people fell back on during the Weimar Republic, which could become a global thing, and so that's real. Now Warren Buffett makes a good point, and what he says is that if you took all the gold in the world and put it into a big cube, I think it would be 53 feet by 53 feet by 53 feet. Okay, that's all the gold in the world. And it's not producing anything. It's just sitting there. It's a storage of value, let's say. But if you own a company, a mining company that produces gold or produces silver or produces copper, okay, then you're being productive. You're getting a return on investment with that, as opposed to just having it sit there as a storage of value. There's a lot to be said about having a storage of value, because, like I said, all the governments are going to be inflating money terribly. They're going to be monetizing the debts, so there's value in that. But having shares in some of those companies that actually produce the stuff and have an ROI, great stuff. I would also argue it's hard to beat oil, right? Because it's been effectively the backing of the U.S. dollar since the U.S. pulled out of convertibility to gold in 1971, when Charles de Gaulle wanted to repatriate French gold from the United States to France. Nixon pulled off the convertibility, and then what happened was the Saudis made a deal with the U.S. where the U.S. would provide protection to Saudi Arabia. There's an ongoing feud there between the Iranians and the Saudis and what have you. But anyhow, U.S. would provide protection. The Saudi royal family could get trained in the U.S. Air Force, fly F-16s, etc., all that stuff. In return, the Saudis would make sure that all oil purchases of Saudi Arabian oil were done in U.S. dollars. So that became the petrodollar. So it's hard to say that oil is not a safe bet. I remember Jim Cilia, who was a former member of Parliament for Calgary Centre. He used to say he made a lot of bad decisions economically, financially in his life, but the one thing that always saved him was that every 3 years or so, oil went through its cycle. When people told you, that oil was going to go to $150 a barrel, it was time to sell. When oil was down at $40 a barrel and people said it was going to be worthless and there was no point and everybody was going to be switching over to hydrogen or God knows what, he said that was time to buy. And he said every 3 years or so going through that cycle saved him and buoyed him up economically. So I think those are real. Those are all good investments. If we're going to be going through some financial instability, if the forex exchanges, who knows if the Russians, the Chinese are going to have implosions, if the euro is going to go down, whatever, those are pretty solid.
All right. And on a more basic level, because you're talking about gold, silver, and oil. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, but will the average person get involved in that? What can Canadians do, let's say, just on a daily basis here to protect themselves from any and all imminent crashes of the Canadian dollar?
Well, continue to use cash, because I don't think you really want to find out what a cashless society is like. It's the ramifications in terms of lack of privacy and everything else are going to be drastic. Like, you have to imagine if the CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency, could just say, you know what, Kevin, I think you owe more money than what you've, filed out and self, kind of filled out your taxes for. So we're going to assess you an extra $10,000. Don't worry about it though. We'll just take it out of your e-wallet. You know,
Yeah.
that's what's coming, folks. That's what Carney wants. Okay, and that's what China has. If you want to understand central bank digital currency, all you got to do is look at the digital yuan in China. That'll tell you everything you need to know. And look at what the Chinese are doing. They are investing in Vancouver real estate, getting their money out of that country as best they can. So you don't want to go there. And so, real estate, has its place. But the problem is, the government tracks all that stuff, whatever. I mean, God knows I've been through my iterations with the CRA. When I sold a property, they took 75% of the equity, and it wasn't based on reality, right? I'm taking them to tax court over that stuff. They took way, way, way more money, hundreds of thousands of dollars more than they ever wrote.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that one for a quick second here, because I know a lot about that. Obviously, with the tax job I do here, is the Canada Revenue Agency is just assessing everybody. And an assessment in Canada is not what you actually owe. It's a guess. I have a guy, his name is Mike Kexum. He's the regional manager for Southwest Ontario, in a recorded conversation that my lawyer says, put it out, but not yet, where he states that an assessment is just a guess. And on these assessments, if they send you warning letters and you ignore them, they will go to the bank, issue a requirement to pay letter, which the bank is not obligated to do anything of. But the bank says, yeah, you know what? We're not going to take the chance that the CRA sues us, and we know Canadians won't sue us, so let's give the money to the CRA. Mm-hmm. But here's the deal. For everybody who doesn't understand the Canada Revenue Agency, they don't actually sue people unless they know that there's a guaranteed win because they pre-greased the palm of the judge. They're not suing anybody. Now, we, the people, have to start criminally charging these bank managers and suing the bank managers personally and the banks to stop this practice. And what Rob, you said, is correct. Because when they assess my clients, I have the option to appeal, and we appeal everything for every client and push it into the future a couple of years, which gets us 2 years of time to move their homes into numbered corporations, move their money to the States or here to Panama, move their cash into crypto or gold or silver. We can clean them out on paper. So if we were to lose in court, which I don't do, there's nothing that the CRA can take. If it's a central bank digital currency, everybody, Rob's right. They're just going to take it. And Rob, I got another example to give you here. Ford is in negotiations with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police that if you are actually speeding in your new Ford, it's going to tell the RCMP you're speeding, who will issue an automatic ticket, and your bank account will get debited. That's what Ford and the RCMP are negotiating right now with the federally chartered banks. And that's not even with the central bank digital currency yet. So what then? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, years ago, I decided to go down the rabbit hole of central bank digital currency. And the more I learn, the more disturbed I am. It is dystopian. It is Big Brother. It is absolute control. Like the best word to describe central bank digital currency is control. They can expire your money, say it's no longer good in 3 months. They can tell you and dictate to you what it's going to be spent on, like an electric vehicle, etc. If you criticize the government, it can be put in hawk. It can be held onto. It can be expired. It can be seized. It can be fined. Like I said, you just have to look at China. They'll even take your pets in China, right? If you don't agree with the government type of thing. Like this is where this stuff is going. And so people have to understand this stuff and just, fight it. Keep your cash, invest in stuff that's real. That's why I say gold, silver, copper, oil, platinum, whatever. Like there's stuff that actually has, real tangible value. And I'll be honest, I'm very skeptical of crypto because it's electronically based. All you need is a massive power outage, an EMP, polar shift, any of those types of things. And that stuff's all, serious trouble.
Yes. Oh, yeah, I understand what you're saying fully. I mean, I like crypto because everybody's beginning to trust it more than any of the world banks out there. And I certainly would rather have Bitcoin than euro dollars right now, or yuan, or rubles, or rupees, or anything else out there. That's the truth. But you're correct. Electromagnetic pulses are not as difficult to create as we originally had thought. It could happen. But I mean, that would also affect the banking system too, equally as much, I would think. So I've often said this: if you want to shut down the economy, just get a bulldozer and attach a chain to those big power towers all over Canada and all over the United States, and just drive, and they'll all come down. That'll kill power in a town for a few days. That's enough to cost billions of dollars. It could actually put people out of work. Now, when they put the towers back up, you tear them back down. That's all it would take to shut down the banking system anyway. So I just have to, I guess we'll say, politely state that Canadian money and Bitcoin are subject to the exact same thing, because I don't think that the Canadian dollar is stored in safes anywhere. I think it's just out there as digital numbers. Tell me if I'm wrong, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, there's been so many mistakes made on the currency and monetary fronts over the last number of decades. The last coin that we had in Canada that was based on any real precious metal in it was the penny, right? That's gone. We got rid of silver in our coins back in the 60s. We got rid of the gold bullion reserve back in the 60s. We've all been floating on this fiat currency with nothing back in it for decades now. And that stuff always comes back to haunt you. There's always a boomerang effect on that. And you can look at the French when the monarchy returned and they started doing the fractional reserve, and the French overprinted money, etc. And they got into inflationary thing. Brooke Shields' family, if you can believe it, historically, were actually involved in the banking system in France, and then they fled to Italy and did the banking for the Vatican and stuff after the French economy collapsed, and then eventually make their way over to the United States. So that's, this fiat stuff, it only goes for so long before it collapses, folks. And the euro's in a bad spot. The Canadian dollar's in a terrible spot. The American dollar, if there's enough fluctuations on the forex exchanges, enough catastrophe striking, that you may even see the Americans have to go back to pegging back to gold.
Yeah, you're right on that. Now we're down to our last 12 minutes here. So trade war, Canada, United States trade war. Let's talk about this one. Trump says he's putting tariffs on Canadian products, and now Canadian folks are taking American products off their shelves in their retail stores. American stores might be doing the same thing. Then we've got at hockey games, Canadians are booing the American anthem. The Americans are retaliating with booing. Now this trade war thing, who wins in this and who loses?
I don't know who the winner is. I'm hard pressed to imagine who the winner is. Really what this was is Donald Trump saying, fix the damn border, right? And like, it's not only Donald Trump that's been saying that. I remember when I was on a TV show, the editors that Larry Shapiro used to tape in Montreal, and we would bring in some Americans, some Canadians, etc. Howard Dean was on the show, etc., governor of Vermont. And, at the time, we had Mujahideen Khalq that was operating out of Montreal. If they had been in the United States, they would have been hiding under a rock. But in Canada, they had a public relations person, they had media contact numbers, the whole nine yards. We had Ahmed Rassam, who was plotting to blow up LAX airport, that was caught leaving Canada to Port Angeles in the United States on the ferry. Like, we've got problems in this country. We've got groups and terrorist organizations and whatnot that are operating here, plotting against the United States. The ambassador Paul Cellucci under Bush talked about Canada being an aircraft carrier off the north coast with a bunch of terrorist organizations in it. He's not wrong. So,
right.
There's things that need to be fixed. We've had CSIS agents for years talking about, and you were right in your introduction when you said they get ignored. Like, how frustrating would that be to be a CSIS analyst who is looking at these terrorist organizations, recommending that they be put on a terrorist list, And the government ignores it, doesn't do anything about it, because the prime minister has the largest Islamic population riding in the country in Papineau in Montreal. It's disgusting. And I understand why Trump's frustrated. And he's basically saying, like, fix it. You know, Canada is spending like 1% of our gross domestic product in the military. The United States spends 3% on something that's 10 times the size as an economy or, you know, population, etc. So that, what does that mean? They're spending 30 times the amount of money. You know, like, like we have to pull up our socks. You know, he's right. You know, and so yeah, it doesn't make sense that, you know, people aren't able to buy Canadian maple syrup more cheaply, or that, you know, Americans aren't able to, you know, sell their products here, and you decrease the purchasing power of both Canadians and Americans in doing tariffs. I think he's just trying to wake us up and say, you know, fix the border.
Well, you heard it here first, Canada. I mean, Trump does not want to bankrupt you because he's sinister. The guy he's a patriot, for God's sakes. Donald J. Trump is well aware of the fact that his demeanor and his attitude and his way of doing things would be successful in one country in the world only, the United States of America. He's fiercely loyal to the country that allowed him to be a billionaire twice over. So why would he not want to protect what he loves? And of course, he's doing the right thing with a family legacy. He's got Donald Trump Jr. and Barron. I'm sure he's grooming them to take over it for him one day as the next president, which I certainly hope they do. The guy loves his country and he wants to protect it. And the Canadian government is a clear and present danger to the United States. And as a result of all that, Canadians are not making money because all our money is just leaving the country. And quite frankly, Americans in Democrat states, they weren't making money either. So there is an opportunity here for Canadians and Americans to get rich if we can get this Trudeau-esque nonsense out of the country and have Trump just do his thing. And that's allow all of us to live safely and make money. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to tell a story, because when Donald Trump was first president in 2016, he had a 2-hour meeting booked with Justin Trudeau. And I heard this through the grapevine because I'm a politician. And I know a lot of other politicians, and it filters around what happened. Okay. And the story I heard was that he had a 2-hour meeting. Trump proposed eliminating all tariffs, total free trade. And Trudeau rejected it, put it aside, said he's not going to cut a deal if Mexico's not in, etc., blah, 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 made some excuses. And then he took the rest of the 2 hours to berate Donald Trump about feminism, because as you know, Justin Trudeau is a self-described labeled feminist, okay? And Donald Trump, from what I understand, was looking at his watch thinking, dear God, when is this meeting going to come to an end? This is ridiculous. He let him have a pass, though, as stupid as that was on Justin Trudeau's part, okay? But then when Justin Trudeau was on his way back to his Transport Canada jet, he began texting about how he had lectured Donald Trump for 2 hours about feminism. At that point, Donald Trump lost it and said, screw this guy. Okay. And so Donald Trump was offering no tariffs, free trade right across the board when he first was meeting with Justin Trudeau. Is it any surprise that when he comes back and he realizes what a puke Trudeau is, that he sticks him with that? I mean,
well, just think about that, Canada. You elected this guy because he had nice hair. And the end result is all of you are broke. Canadians are broke. And I'm not mocking you for that, but you do have to be cognizant of your political choices out there. And electing a guy like Trudeau because he was handsomer than the political candidate on the conservative side got you this. And look what the Americans did when they decided to vote diversity and equity. They got Barack Obama. Up to that point, he was the worst president in American history until Biden took over, and then Kamala very, 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 very temporarily. That's what you get when you don't pay attention and when you're looking at the wrong things. Yeah, I think everybody out there right now, Rob, maybe you agree, maybe you don't, but everybody out there has to start talking like Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary. I don't especially care for the guy, but when he comes out and starts talking about, I want to make money, and then he gives away for free tips on how to make money. We need 10,000 of those types of guys getting all of us to listen to them so that we can all get wealthy. Because now, Rob, just to give you an idea of what's going on in my life, in Canada, this is how bad the entire Canadian economy is and so on. I was put under a court order that there's 152 people I could not talk about and 12 subject matters I couldn't talk about. The Canadian government made it clear to me that I was only allowed to podcast for 2 hours a week, and that there was a leeway for me to go 10 minutes over my time, which meant that I was making less than $900 a month in Canada. My rent was $900 a month. So to eat, I had to cut grass and clean the house and whatnot that I was living in. That's how pathetic that is. I leave Canada. I come to an ultra-conservative country with one unified culture, and I make $500,000 in less than a year. So there's money in Panama. There's opportunity outside of communist countries, everybody. If you're looking to make money, my advice is get the hell out of Canada. Rob, your take. We're down to our last 4 minutes here.
Yeah, when Obama was president, the Canadian dollar was actually trading above par. We had more purchasing power than the US dollar did. I remember at that time in Detroit, you could buy a 12,000 square foot Tudor Revival mansion built by, an automotive king, for $200,000. It's a hell of a lot. Now, okay, the Canadian dollar is at a 40% deficit to the American dollar, and it's probably going to drop further. So, it's time to change who's at the helm, and I hope that we move along the lines of what Milei is doing in Argentina, because, like I said, they can't raise the interest rates high to fight inflation because it'll bankrupt themselves. They don't even have the ability, if the economy tanks, to cut the rates very much because then people won't buy the debt instruments. So they either have to cut spending or they have to inflate the money supply. And I think a lot of politicians are lazy. Most politicians in the Western world are lazy. They're going to inflate the money supply. What they should be doing is what Milei is doing in cutting spending. That's what they should be doing.
Yeah. Well, Milei cut 20,000 government jobs in the first couple of months he's in office, and look what's happened. They're actually flourishing for the first time in a while. And I'm getting some questions in all the chat rooms here about what were you not allowed to talk about in Canada. We're down to 2 minutes. So I really can't get into that. It's a long list of things I can't talk about in Canada. There's no bans on freedom of speech here in Panama, let me tell you. You can say what you want here, and I intend to. My mouth's going to get a whole lot bigger than it already is. Rob, tell people who you are and how they can find you.
Well, Rob Anders, former member of Parliament. My email address, robforblue@gmail.com, ROB, numeral 4, blue, BLUE, ampersand, gmail.com. As a result of some of the shows I've done in the past, people ask me to add them onto my list that I send out emails about central bank digital currency. I'd be honored to do that. So yeah, keep cash, folks.
Yes. Rob, listen, it's always a pleasure to have you here. I know you're a banking expert. You've been a politician for over 20 years in Canada. You're one of the rare politicians out there that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police has raided your house because you're just too damn clever. And you've told too many, truths. But thanks for fighting for Canadians. Thanks for fighting for freedom in general. And thanks for being here tonight. Greatly appreciated.
Much appreciated. It's an honor to be with you, sir. Thank you.
Take care of yourself. Good night. Wow, that's Rob Anders, everybody. Check him out right there. Always a pleasure to have him on the show. I'm grateful beyond reproach that he's able to give us some time to talk tonight about these very pressing issues. Now, I know it sounded more like a bit of a political show tonight, everybody, but I want y'all just to be aware of the dangers of bad leadership, but also to pay attention to what really is going on, because I do want Canadians to be wealthy, whether you think so or not. And you're not going to do it if you're still in Canada scratching around for what's left over. You got to leave and look for other opportunities. And in Trump's America, there are opportunities. Here in Panama, there's opportunities. Argentina is thriving right now. There's opportunities elsewhere. Try not being afraid. Get out, try something brand new. I left my comfort zone, and I've never been more successful in my life. Here in Panama, I'm having an absolute blast. And don't forget, everybody, yes, I am Canada's #1 income tax and corporate tax expert. I will go back 10 years and get you back at least half, up to 100% of all your tax money back. If you've got a corporation that's suffering in Canada, the United States, I can take all that debt away in less than 3 days now. I've perfected my craft. Get a hold of me on my personal website at kevinjjohnston.com. Thank you for being here, everyone. We'll see you in a week. Take care and good night.